My name is Laura, and I am MFA's Exhibitions Manager, and I will be your host for tonight's Wil Talk with artists. Our digital discussion tonight is with full-time painter Beth Bathe. Beth became a full-time representational painter after working as a graphic designer. She's been working in plein air since 2013 and has been taking part in several plein air competitions every year. Her paintings have won numerous awards and honors, and she is represented by several galleries as well. Beth's paintings have been described as evoking nostalgia, like that of an old sepia-toned photograph, often with just touches of color. Additionally, I'd like to introduce the host of our show, Wil Scott. Wil is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the former head of adult programs in the National Gallery of Arts. He is uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between the artists and the public. Do you guys want to get started?
Okay, thank you, Laura, for that introduction and for providing the tech support tonight. And most of all, Beth, thank you for being willing to participate. I think it's very exciting that we can feature at least one of the artists from upcoming Paint Annapolis. And before we really dive in, I want to thank all of the people who are attending tonight. I see some old familiar faces and some names and faces I don't recognize, so that's great. And just a reminder that Beth is participating in the upcoming Paint Annapolis, when you could actually meet her personally and watch her paint and perhaps take home something of hers and enjoy it forever. So we hope that something like that might take place because you're attending tonight. Now, Beth, I think unlike sometimes where we've talked a little bit before we look at the work, I would like to look at the first thing that we have, which I believe is called Mids in Masks, and we can talk about a number of different aspects of your very interesting work.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Laura, that's great. Beth, this interested me when you sent it to us as one of the things that you'd like to have us talk about this evening. And as soon as I saw it, I thought that this might be some social commentary or political commentary. And then when we talked a little bit over the weekend, you had a completely, I think, different reason for approaching it. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that phenomena that I always find interesting in my own work and in the work of other artists. The artist has one intention, but a viewer, of course, brings completely different experiences in a whole different context for viewing and engaging the work. So what were you trying to accomplish when you decided to paint this image?
Well, this was painted for probably the only live plein air event I did in 2020. This was for Paint Annapolis, and anyone who's been to Annapolis knows that the Naval Academy is right there, the campus. And so you see the midshipmen walking around all the time, and they're always in full uniform. And so this was in October of 2020. And this is, when we were all totally masked up and, no restaurants weren't open or anything. And these were a group of, cadets walking down the street. And I thought it was really interesting, just this sort of the stark white uniforms. And if you notice, some have white masks on and some have black masks on. So it's like white, black, white, black. Mm-hmm. And this was also, there was an African-American guy, one is a woman. So I just thought how just this little snapshot just shows how the pandemic kind of just affected everybody. Everybody's in the masks. It's just a little slice of, life on the street.
Yeah, so especially just the last little phrase that you uttered seems to capture, and let me just be sure that I'm understanding what you were intending. And it's almost like street photography, which I enjoy very much. It's a little slice of life. It's a moment in time. And so how do you react to, I'm not going to try to read a lot into this because it could be controversial. This is an image. The first thing I thought when I saw it is that it might be political or social commentary more than just capturing a moment in time. How do you react to me saying that that's the way that I reacted?
Well, I think it's interesting because that wasn't my intention at all. And I haven't heard that at all from anyone. So this is a small little painting, 6x9. It was in the show and it sold. So, I mean, not a lot of people saw it.
Yeah.
But and basically when we go to these competitions, we're painting a moment in time. You sit in front of a building or a car or, whatever.
Right. No, okay. And that's of course what Paint Annapolis is. And I think this is developing in the way our conversation, the way that I hoped it would, to say, and I'm going to say this and you tell me if I'm on track, on base, and if not, how you would rephrase it. You're primarily a painter across the board who is painting on plein air, painting in a medium that allows you to work fairly quickly, capturing a moment in time. That's who you are or what you're about as an artist.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that I think that your technique is very interesting and offers a lot of potential for interpretation and understanding, as well as admiration for the technical aspects. So why don't we go over to the very next image and talk a little bit more about your medium, because it's not one that everybody is familiar with, and even those who are perhaps don't understand all of the elements that make it something that you want to pursue. So sure. Laura, next image, please.
This was also for Paint Annapolis, and this is a bushel of crabs. Basically, I'm using water-soluble oil paints, which are oil paints that have been manufactured so you can use water as a medium. The old saying, oil and water don't mix. So traditional oil painter can't use water, so they use either non-mineral spirits or turpentine, where I can use water as a medium. So what I do is I can start out very washy, kind of almost like a watercolorist with a lot of water. I use basically a very tonal palette. I like them to look kind of like old sepia tone photos that have maybe been hand tinted with just a little bit of color. And everywhere that you see that's white on my painting is I will do these washes and values, and everywhere you see that's white, I go in with little rubber squeegees and I carve away. So that becomes, it's almost like you're drawing with the little squeegee.
So it's sort of, and it's also a little like a traditional watercolorist who leaves the reserved white paper to capture more brilliance.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about makes me, even with my background, have questions because I'm not familiar with the medium. So since it's water instead of oil, does it dry faster? Do you have to work faster?
No. They are oil paints, linseed oil and pigment, and they add another oil like a soy lecithin oil. That's why it could be mixed with water. But once you start painting, they dry just like a traditional oil painting. I mean, the water has to evaporate, but the painting is an oil painting. I mean, after you've done your first layer with water, you can't use water again. You have to go back and either use the mediums that they make for water-soluble oil paints, or you could use traditional, mediums like liquid or whatever. You could do.
One last sort of minor point. Can you paint thick impastos with these materials the way? Okay. Then why do you choose this material and not traditional oils?
The reason is that my technique with the washes. If I use so much turpentine or turpenoid or whatever, that's a lot of chemicals, and they don't work the same way. They kind of have an aura around them. Where the water really gives a nice wash.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great to know. I was not aware of that. the nature of this material. Here's my question as a lover of art. Even the mids and your rather free technique, still that was very concretely identifiable as a group of figures. This could almost be, at least at a first glance, an abstract piece.
Yes.
A series of geometric shapes, almost like a cubist work. How does that fit in with your development as an artist? And is that intentional? Or again, is it just the subject and the fact that these are the colors that one would find in nature of a bunch of crabs lying in a wicker basket?
I think what I'd like to do, especially with, the washes and the different, areas of value, I try to give as minimal amount of information. And I think that's where the abstract quality comes in. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll focus in on one little area. Like if you notice, there's like one crab there where I've even gone in with like a little rigger brush and done the, the underbelly with a little, I don't know what a crab's anatomy is,
Well,
but you can really tell it. And then some other areas I leave very vague. And I think that's just, the artistic license of it.
so you're starting by looking at a basket of crabs, and
yes,
your initial impulse, your earliest efforts are to describe what you've seen, but as you evolve the work, it may become more or less abstract depending on just how you're working that day.
exactly. And a lot of times what I'll do is I think this is because was 35 years as a graphic designer. I mean, I spend a lot of time, thinking in my head and composing what the painting is going to be. A lot of times, plein air painters, they'll go to a place and they look out in front of them and they paint what they see, this distance away from them and whatever. And I like to sort of shake that up, like either focus in and maybe one branch of the tree or the roots of the tree, or looking through the tree at the house, beyond. So I really, really think about the composition instead of just the image I'm seeing in front of me.
You just said a couple of very interesting things to me. One, you made a reference to your career as a graphic designer, and then you talked about how your approach to plein air painting may be different than the majority of plein air painters. And there's an artist that I know that you admire greatly and that I thought I recognized as a possible influence. And so we want to talk about that. But first, let's go to the next image, Laura. And when we have that up, could you say, while everybody's getting a chance to enjoy this and look at it, Beth, could you say a little bit about your career as a graphic designer, just quickly, how'd you decide on that career? How did you prepare for that career, and why'd you give it up?
Well, my dad was a graphic designer, and so I think I just sort of came by it. That's kind of always what I wanted to do. And so I went to art school. I went to college for art, and I got a degree, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Communication Arts and Design. And this was the early 80s, 1980s. And then I, went into the commercial graphic design business. I worked for a studio in Alexandria, Virginia for about 15 years. They did very high-end, like corporate logos, brochures, that kind of stuff. And then I went out on my own, and I had my own business for about 25 years and did a lot of healthcare work. And my last gig as a graphic designer was when things were really switching over to computers and a lot of web design. And it just wasn't for me. It was just so much computer programming. And
so would you have continued with graphic design if you didn't have to learn all of that computer programs and how to manipulate the computer generated images and all that?
I was doing it because, I was trained to do like pay stuff and stuff, but I had to switch over in the early 90s, to the computer. So I was doing everything on the computer.
Oh,
But
okay.
but that was doing for print, you have
Mhm.
digital files for print, but then it switched over, everything was, I don't know. We actually moved from the Northern Virginia area. We moved up to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. My partner Bill retired. And so I said, well, I'm going to retire too.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to paint. So when we moved to Lancaster, that's when I started painting full time.
Yeah. So you're not placing any kind of value yourself. You're not making a comparison and a judgment in the value between a more commercial type of art like graphic design and what you're doing now as a fine art. That's not really important in the way that you.
Well, I actually think it's critically important. I think that the way I look at things and the way my compositions are, I totally have my graphic designer hat on, like how does this look? How do, so I think and a lot of actually plein air painters, a lot of painters have a background in graphics. So I think it was an invaluable part of my career.
Okay. Well, that's good. And that certainly makes sense. And you're utilizing, I can see, great design skills in this composition, for instance. Did you find the shipyard, the boatyard with the boats arranged this way, or did you do a little? Okay.
Yes, and that's what we do. You go to one of these, if we're talking about the competitions, and this one was also painted for Paint Annapolis. And you drive around and you see what strikes you. And I just loved, now I've lost visual for you guys. So you're looking at the boats, the big blue boat, the little.
Yes, all lined up.
So what struck me about this is, you'll see these shipyards, boats up on the stocks all the time. But what I thought this was just where I was standing, it's like the line of the blue, the bottom of the hull of that boat just lined up perfectly with that teal boat in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, the water lines line up amazingly. And that's what I was looking at and wondered if you found that or you created that.
No. Basically, when we're at a plein air event, you're supposed to paint what you see. You're not supposed to like paint a giraffe in or, so it has to be pretty much what you see. You could take out a tree or move it around, and you have some artistic license. But basically the event in like Paint Annapolis wants you to come to their area and paint what you see there. Their buildings and boats and that kind
so
of.
Why have you returned to Paint Annapolis a number of times? And it's not a given that you're going to be accepted again and again. And you've been fortunate. I think we've been fortunate to have you be accepted.
It's a wonderful event. It's very, very well run. The subject matter is fantastic. You've got, the little historic streets, and you've got, all the wonderful boats, and sometimes though you could go out to the, areas and see farms, and it's just a beautiful area.
So when you come here, the images that you selected for us to look at today and share with the audience are all water centered. Or downtown centered. You mentioned the farms and the more rural areas. Do you take the opportunity? Do you look for the opportunity to go and do that, or do you like to?
Sure. I think the last 2 years, I've been in it, I think because of COVID, they had it very tied in, and so you kind of had to stay in Annapolis proper.
Yeah.
But when you do think about the clientele that come there, and they want to see boats, and it's a good way to practice boats.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed looking at your work and learning more about it. And I certainly think all of the things that you've shown us are very impressive. Let's look at the next one and then talk about that artist that seems to have a special place in terms of your admiration and inspiration. this is not that artist's favorite type of subject, but I think the way that you composed it and painted it lets us talk about that artist, who is Andrew Wyeth.
Yay, Andrew.
How did you encounter Wyeth's work, and what is it about his work that is continually appealing and inspiring to you?
Well, I think I now live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it's just a stone's throw from Chadsford, Pennsylvania, which is about 40 minutes away from me. So I spent a lot of time painting around there, and I think I was when I started painting, I started painting high chroma color, just like, everybody. But I kept going back to, I really liked the drawing aspect of painting. And so I started turning to more of a tonalist, more, the sepia tones. And and there's something about Andrew Wyeth. He's regarded as a regionalist. And so basically Andrew Wyeth, his whole career, only painted in two places. He painted around Chadsford, Pennsylvania, and up in Maine. He painted where he lived, and got to know the people and got to know his area, and you just can feel it in his paintings. And I kind of feel that when we go to the different competitions in the different places, it's like you really want to immerse yourself in that area and get to know that area. I think Andrew Wyeth's, well, first of all, he's just exceptional draftsman. He could draw and just beautifully. And just the emotion that he evokes.
I'm glad that you mentioned the emotion. I have personally a kind of a fraught relationship with Andrew Wyeth's art. I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and got my doctorate at the University of Delaware, which is only about 20 miles from Chadsford, roughly 25 miles. And so I was kind of immersed. In fact, one of my aunts lived in one of those fieldstone houses, the kind that he painted again and again and again.
Oh, yeah.
So on one level, his work was known to me from the time I was quite young, and I was interested in it. But then I began to think that it was a little cliched. But you have just, I think, articulated what, as I became older and became more familiar with the full range of his work, there's something emotional. There's something very subtle but powerful. Christina's World may be the image that he's most famous for and that reveals that most openly. Are you attempting to do something like that in your work, to have a resonance that comes out of your experience of the place?
Yes. What I like to do very often is when I do a painting, I won't put like modern cars in, or I really want them to have a timeless kind of aspect to them. It's very interesting, like in a show where my paintings are on the wall, I love to hang back and listen to people as they talk about the paintings. And a lot of times people say, oh, that looks like grandma's house, or look at the water reflection, da, da, da. And I didn't even make a water reflection, but that's what they see.
Yes.
And I think that's the abstract quality. And I just, I've had people buy my paintings, not even of that area, and say, that looks just like the house, that blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fascinating too, when you hear somebody who doesn't know you're the artist, and they're essentially telling somebody all about what you were doing as an artist.
Yes.
And you're scratching your head thinking, well, how did they see that?
I love it though, because, I might have, like, it's for instance, like the mids and masks, I had one intention, you thought something else.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic.
I do too. I'm not the least bit put off when people say things about my work that I think, wow,
Yeah.
I've never even, that didn't cross my mind. Yeah, that's part of the excitement of being an artist, don't you think?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I've had people, sometimes when I've taught workshops, and I've had artists, come to me like almost in tears. They're like, this is what I want to do. And it's, I just love how you put so much emotion into it. And because a lot
On that point.
of times with the washes, when it washes and drips and stuff, it's like I leave those in there. You know, it's like the painting's kind of doing its own thing. So
What you just said about the way that you handle the paint and about emotion is getting at something that I feel very strongly about your work, at least the limited amount that I've seen. You have a palette that is sometimes, as here, verges on monochromatic. There are a lot of earth tones and grays and blacks, even browns, these kinds of things. Are you limiting yourself to that palette for any reason, or are you simply reproducing basically what you've seen before?
I don't want to get too caught up in the color of something. So the basic part of my painting is really the drawing and the value. And like I said, I like them to look kind of like my version of an old sepia tone photo where I pick one color. Like I just did a dogwood flower painting, you know, and the only color I used was a little bit of green for the leaves. And I think that's the timeless part. I just want them to look timeless. And I also think it sets me apart from all the colorists out there. It's a little different.
Do you ever paint in grisaille alone, or do you ever take photographs, make photographs as independent works of art?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And like one of my really love, which I love to do, is I love charcoal drawing and I love the figure. And in a way, what I'm doing is kind of like a charcoal drawing. You know, you do, you know, fine charcoal where you draw and then you use the erasers to wipe out the white, and that's kind of what I'm doing with this paint.
Yep, I can definitely see that. I think we have one or two more. Let's look at those. Jimmy. This is just so vibrant, you know, especially in comparison to some of the other work that we've just looked at.
Yes. So that's totally red. You know, it was so funny. That was Paint Annapolis, and that was last year. So that was 2021. And it was so hot that day. It was so hot. And I walked into the Annapolis seafood, whatever company, and, you know, talked to the guy, and I said, you know, could I paint your crabs? And he was like, what? And so he went out back and he had a couple that he had cooked, and here was Jimmy. But it was really fun. I got to paint in the air conditioned, you know, cooler. So I painted Jimmy the same time I painted all the bushel of crabs.
And did you have something
I had to paint him in red because, you know, he was a cooked guy.
Did you eat him later?
No, I didn't eat him later. They didn't even let me keep him. They should have.
Yeah. Well, this is a very appealing work. Not so much for me for the subject, although that is appealing, but the color is just so vital. It's so alive. It really snaps there. And so let's look at the next work, please. There's real presence about these two boats, and I guess it is the way that you have such strong composition, and of course the way that the bows of the boat kind of loom up out of the darkness. What were you after when you?
This is a subject matter. Now this one was painted actually for Plein Air Easton last year, which is on the eastern shore of Maryland, but a lot of the same subject matter as Annapolis. And another thing that I'm really drawn to is what I call the vanishing landscape. You know, it's like old buildings that are, you know, fallen down, or nature's taking over or whatever. And these are two boats, and they're Matilda and Myrtle, and they're called by boats. They're the boats that go out to the smaller oyster boats and get the oysters and bring them in. And they've been in the same, I think it's Burnham fishery or whatever. They've been in the same family for like years and years. And they're just two old girls that are still, you know, doing their job. you know, and they were, you know, I'm attracted to things that are my color scheme anyway. So they were
Mhm.
you know, 2 brown boats. But I just wanted to really give them a presence. It's kind of ghosting and kind of because they're here but not here. They still have some usage, but they're old girls. So yeah.
Yeah, in this case, we connected perfectly on this because that's what I thought. It's like they're sort of lurking in the darkness,
They
kind of
are.
merging out of the darkness. And just coincidentally, I have one of my photographs on the easel behind me, and it's a farmhouse, an abandoned farmhouse on the Eastern Shore that is now gone, that I took some time ago and was juried into a show at Salisbury State University on the Eastern Shore
Mhm.
for vanishing parts of Maryland and Maryland history.
Yeah, that kind of stuff just breaks your heart. Like you'll go to an
Yeah.
event and like the next year you'll go and it's not there anymore, or
Yep.
it's even worse. And then I feel that I've done like a great service to, you know, sometimes I once painted this really, really old, big Victorian hotel
Mhm.
that they were going to tear down. And, you know, at one point this was a grand building. And I figured, and I gave it a, you know, a really beautiful send off, I think.
Well, if it was like this image, then you certainly did. And this one really resonates for me. And I hope that in this little overview of your work, we've all been able to see how you've really connected with the experience of being here in Annapolis and our region and our area. So I really thank you for taking the time to share this with us. And now we have a fair amount of time left. And so I wonder if anybody who's been listening has questions that they want to direct towards Beth.
This is Susan Engel. I just wanted to say that I love Myrtle and Matilda. This is such a wonderful way to pay homage to, that was the first thing when I saw it, because I'm familiar with the buy boats, and I thought, oh, what a wonderful way to pay homage to these working gals.
Certainly
Thank
is.
you. That's exactly what I thought.
That's great. Thank you, Susan. Anyone else? Comments like that are welcome, as well as questions.
So I've got a question from one of our interns, Marissa, for you, Beth.
Okay.
She is a painter, and I will just start by saying I know nothing about painting. So if I if I mess something up, please forgive me. But she wanted to know, besides for highlights, do you use exclusively transparent paints, or does that not matter because you use the paints so thinly?
Wonderful question. And I use almost exclusively transparent paints. The reason being that even when I paint like full strength, they have a transparency to them. My main color I use is raw umber, and the that's that sort of gray, brown, khaki color. But it's very transparent. And then the second main color I use is ultramarine blue, and it's transparent. And then I use a transparent red oxide, a yellow ochre, and other colors. You know, sometimes I will go back in, like if I'm trying to do a misty, cloudy day, I will go back in with more opaque colors to create kind of a mist on top. But a great question. I mainly use transparent colors. And the brand of paint I use is, it's called Cobra. It's made by Royal Talons. It's the same company that makes Rembrandt oil colors.
Unless somebody else is going to jump in right away, I have a question. Have you been doing more or less the same kind of subject matter since you left your graphic design career? And do you foresee continuing in that same vein?
When I first left, my first subject matter I did was the figure, and I did a lot of figurative work, and I apprenticed with a wonderful figurative painter in Alexandria, Virginia. So I did that for a couple of years. and then started doing the landscapes. Some while I was still in Northern Virginia, but once I moved to Pennsylvania, I didn't know anybody. So I joined the Susquehanna Valley Plein Air Painters. And that's when I started painting outside. And there's just something about getting out in nature, spending 2, 3, 4 hours, really looking at something. I think in this day and age, nobody like looks at anything. We're so busy, and you have the phone and the whatever. So it's been great. I'm at an event this week. Today's Wednesday. I've already painted 7 paintings since Monday noon. This morning I painted this beautiful lit kind of road in a field, and these 2 red-winged blackbirds were flying around me the whole time. I got to listen to them. It just I love it. I really, really do.
Do you have any things in mind for when you come to Annapolis in a few weeks? Any places that you have visited before, or that you wanted to visit here that you didn't get to?
Well, I really like the Maritime Museum down, in the Eastport area. So I'll probably go there. And again, I love architecture. I'm really an architecture, crazy junkie. So I will probably, hit the main streets again.
Good.
There'll be a boat or 2 thrown in.
I hope so. Well, I think it's been fascinating for me to talk with you and look more at your work. And I'm looking forward to, even though I'll be out of town for most of the week of Paint Annapolis, I hope I'll be able to catch you somewhere painting and see the work that you produce.
Yeah, it's a great, there's not only are the juried artists there, but Paint Annapolis does it so local artists can come and paint too. And it's just a really fun week. I think the people in town love to see us out painting. It's a really fun time.
Yep. I think a lot of people appreciate that all of you are here and creating such beautiful things. So again, thanks to everybody for listening in. Remember that if you have a question that you want to send through the chat, we'll get back to you if we can. Even if you have think of something later tonight or tomorrow that you wanted to ask Beth. Otherwise, I hope that you'll see her on the streets and around Annapolis painting in a few weeks for Paint Annapolis.
Bye.
So thank you, Beth, and thank you, Laura, for your help. And we'll see you in a few weeks in the next Wil Talks.
I know.